are back, baby!
The opening days of the Trump administration,
$1,500 for a pardon,
opened the door for hundreds of people convicted and imprisoned after the January 6th protests on Capitol Hill. 4 years of bitter debate.
Donald Trump summoned a mob to Washington, D.C.
And an unprecedented federal pursuit.
FBI.
We look at the reasons, and now, the reunions.
Feels good, doesn't it?
Changes may be coming to American education, but many parents and children could not wait.
We learn a lot more than you'd expect here.
This week, we sit in on a so-called micro school and get a lesson on what motivates kids.
It's because we want to. We want to learn. We want to get ahead.
In the years following COVID, we're still examining the long-term physical damage done to our bodies by the virus and the vaccine. But what about our minds?
What is mass psychosis?
A moment in time where an entire population all goes crazy at the same time.
This week, a look at what COVID may have done to our collective psyche.
Welcome to Full Measure. I'm Sharyl Attkisson. The biggest mass prosecution of our time has been followed by the biggest mass pardons and releases from prison. It all began with protests on January 6, 2021. They sparked numerous controversies still being hashed out today. Did feds instigate violence that day? Were prosecutions weaponized? Was an unarmed protester shot unjustly? And should there have been pardons? Today, we look at the releases.
We are back, baby!
We were on site at the Washington, D.C. jail as people gathered ahead of the historic mass pardons and releases. Among those here to support their January 6th brethren, several who'd already done their time.
I did about 32 months for pushing a fence. And believe it or not, I actually had a full scholarship to the University of Alabama and Washington and Lee law schools. And, January 6th kind of put the kibosh on that.
About 1,300 people were convicted of crimes for storming the Capitol after a pro-Trump rally on January 6, 2021.
I know that everyone here will soon be marching over to the Capitol building to peacefully and patriotically make your voices heard.
The vast majority were peaceful, but there were violent clashes between police and some rioters. January 6 became the biggest mass prosecution event in U.S. history, with Trump's enemies claiming it was an insurrection that threatened democracy.
Donald Trump summoned a mob to Washington, D.C., and ultimately spurred that mob to wage a violent attack on our democracy.
Others insisted the crowd was incited, then unfairly prosecuted by a weaponized Department of Justice. Trennis Evans is one of the January 6th attendees who cooperated with the FBI after the rally. Nevertheless, he was awakened one morning at his home by an FBI SWAT team.
FBI.
We first told a story here on Full Measure 2 years ago. Surveillance video shows FBI agents, weapons drawn, surrounding the Texas home of Trennis Evans.
Looked like a dozen agents around your house.
Oh, it's a lot more than that, yeah. So there was 20-plus agents there. They had snipers. They had vehicles to block it off the street. I mean, it was insane.
And your 13-year-old son is out on the front deck with his hands up.
Yeah.
That's his son, blue shirt, hands up. Considering the presence of a small army from the FBI, you might think Evans was a vicious criminal, armed and dangerous. In fact, he had no history of violence. This was his crime. He's in the yellow hat, climbing through a window to enter the U.S. Capitol in Washington, D.C. on January 6th.
People were coming out of the building saying the police are letting us in. You can go in, you can just walk around, everybody's taking videos, it's fine.
Since we last talked,
Today, Evans welcomes the pardon, even after already serving his jail sentence for simple misdemeanors, entering and remaining in a restricted building.
20 days. I was the first person sentenced to weekend prison for January 6th. I went to a maximum security facility where they held me in solitary confinement. They chained me up like Hannibal Lecter, haul me up to this unit and say, this is where we kept the 9/11 guys, and then they have to let me out every Monday morning. I mean...
So wait, each time you were in solitary confinement for the weekend?
Yes.
So you're done with your time?
Yeah, I'm done with my time. Still on federal probation.
FBI Special Agent Stephen Friend was suspended after refusing to take part in SWAT raids of nonviolent January 6 suspects like Evans. What did you think was so wrong about the raids?
I felt that there was definitely a harder hand in the way that the arrests and the searches were going to be carried out, regardless of the individual's involvement in January 6th.
The first releases we saw came 2 days after President Trump's inauguration.
Approximately 1,500 for a pardon.
Hey, baby, I love you. I'm coming home. Thanks for the support while I was in there. She's an awesome, amazing woman. She's had to take care of our little farmstead in northern New Mexico, take care of the critters, run her job, run the household, homeschool her children. And so she's been busier than the proverbial one-armed paper hanger.
Outside the Washington, D.C. jail, the mother of the only person violently killed that day, unarmed protester Ashley Babbitt.
Today means that we've been working for this for 4 years, waiting for President Trump to come back into office so that he could pardon the men and women that have been unjustly charged behind the events of January 6th. It also means there's hope of some sort of investigation into my daughter's death that never actually happened.
Babbitt was shot by Capitol Police Lieutenant Michael Byrd.
There's a gun! Hey, he's got a gun!
As she tried to climb through a broken window in the Capitol. Prosecutors didn't charge Byrd, concluding there was no evidence he didn't fear for his life or the lives of Congress when he pulled the trigger. Those released include the man serving the longest sentence, Enrique Tarrio. The former head of the activist group The Proud Boys was serving 22 years for seditious conspiracy. Nobody was actually charged with sedition, insurrection, or treason. He wasn't in D.C. for the riots, but prosecutors said he organized a plan to storm government buildings.
President Trump said that he was going to view these cases, the nature of these cases on a case-by-case basis. And I think he thoroughly did. People who put their hands on a police officer should get charged with whatever it is, whether it's assault on a police officer, but that's not where the problem in these cases lie. The problem is on these cases lie in the miscarriage of justice and how it was performed in these cases in D.C.
More than 160 rioters were charged with using a weapon or violently attacking police. They were pardoned too. One poll by a left-leaning group taken before Trump took office showed 2/3 of Americans opposed pardoning people who committed violent crimes. But a similar number, 69%, did not disagree with pardoning nonviolent offenders like Trennis Evans.
What does that mean to you?
It means restoration to at least some respect. I mean, I'm on federal probation still. I'm going to be on federal probation to the end of 2025. I started on federal probation March of 2021. I'm still on it for misdemeanor trespassing. No one hurt, no one damaged. I spoke out against any of those things, and yet here I am still, because they don't like the things I say today.
And that goes away with a pardon.
Goes away.
Several Capitol rioters committed suicide awaiting sentencing on minor charges. The Justice Department is now dismissing hundreds of cases that were still under active prosecution. When we come back, the micro school revolution. President Trump has issued a new directive encouraging school choice and education freedom. Across America, parents frustrated with public education are searching for better options. Today, Lisa Fletcher takes us inside a new kind of school that gives families more control, micro schools.
You're going to find a different way to achieve your goal. What is the most important step in that process?
This is Acton Academy Falls Church, a so-called micro school. based in an unassuming storefront 10 miles west of Washington, D.C. in Virginia. It's a teaching approach that customizes education to fit each student's needs, interests, and learning styles.
Ooh, it's an 8. So that means I have to put 8 cards down.
150 years ago, a microschool could have passed for a one-room schoolhouse with kids from different grades learning in the same classroom. This modern version has been around since the 1970s, but really started growing in the early 2000s. The COVID pandemic accelerated the growth. At this school, and some 95,000 others like it in the U.S., students are grouped by ability rather than grade level. And sometimes, class isn't held in a classroom at all. On this day, kids ages 6 to 9 learn about the science of color by mixing different water paints.
It shape a little? Oh, I see.
Older kids between 10 and 13 tackle tougher topics like how to achieve a goal.
Will you focus on improving the skill you struggle with, or would you try to find an alternative path to success?
I have huge dreams and I need to break it down.
11-and-a-half-year-old Sam explains how learning here works.
Okay, so for parents who aren't familiar with this kind of education, they might look at it and say, well, they seem to like it and they're having a lot of fun, but how much are they learning?
We learn a lot more than you'd expect here. If you're reading something, you won't just be reading about this subject the whole time. They'll actually show you how to do it and show you what it is. You'll be doing it and you'll learn how to do it.
10-year-old Izzy.
We have this thing called passion projects. And you pick a project that you really like. You just work on it. And I feel like it's more open. It's not just sitting at a desk where the teacher tells you what to do. And then when you get home, there's an hour of homework.
At 13, Katie is the oldest in the class.
Parents who see this, they're having fun. They might, how are they even learning? It's because we want to. We want to learn. We want to get ahead. We want to see the progress that we've made and help each other do it as well.
Government definitions of what constitutes microschools are rare, and only some states give them official designation. Broadly speaking, microschools are multifamily learning environments serving children from kindergarten through high school. They can be formed by parents, churches, or companies like Minds in Motion or Acton Academy, which operates this school. It's estimated that between 1.1 and 2.1 million children attend microschools, about the same number attending Catholic schools. Microschools can be free because they are supported by taxpayers through vouchers, or cost more than $20,000 if private.
Parents really have come a long way in understanding that not every school meets every need of their child or children.
Jeannie Allen founded the Center for Education Reform, a group that supports microschools.
For decades, parents were very dissatisfied with education, but they thought it was their child. They thought it was their misunderstanding. They thought there was something wrong with what they were expecting. If I see my 4th grader or my 9-year-old is like a budding artist, why wouldn't I want her being exposed to real forms of art earlier without being put aside like it's an alternative or an extracurricular?
Does that come at the expense of all of the other parts of academics?
There's actually more education going on across a wider variety of subject areas that you typically get in a 7.5 hour school day that's prescribed with 40 or 50-minute blocks.
These programs are obviously designed to make the lives of students better. But how does it impact a parent's life who maybe felt unheard?
The one word that parents use more than anything when it comes to their involvement with microschools is empowerment.
So I ran over and placed the hand.
For Izzy's mom, Meredith Davis, collaborating with the school and other parents to set goals for the kids is one of the things that attracted her to microschools. With her son Anderson also attending, she values the opportunity to be actively involved in shaping their education.
For most people, it's very safe to go with what you know. And for millions of parents, despite frustration with traditional education, they're sticking with it because it's what they know and it's what we've done here in the United States forever.
We spend more per child on education than any other country, and our educational outcomes, our learning outcomes, are pretty abysmal, actually. So what you know and what you're comfortable with might not actually be doing that well.
Microschools don't typically give letter grades or standardized tests, and there's no good data showing how many students go on to college.
Microschools, of course, are getting pushback in states and in many communities, not from parents or educators, but from government regulators who don't know what to do with something that operates and looks so unique and different. Education is probably the industry that has the largest amount of vested interest in people who want to protect what they have.
For 10-year-old Judah, unique and different is exactly why microschool works for him.
We get to chill, we get to wear whatever we want. We don't really have to sit in desks and always be perfect.
Yeah, it looks like a great model for some kids. Yeah. You know, a lot of these alternative plans came about or expanded during the Biden administration. Any thoughts as to what the Trump administration might do?
Well, throughout his campaign, President Trump has vowed to save American education. So he's proposed a parental bill of rights, which would require curriculum transparency. And he's talked about ramping up funding to schools where parents elect the principal and reduce the number of administrators. And then there's also growing support in the House and Senate for the 529 plans, which are savings plans typically used for college, but now to be allowed to use them for things like microschools or homeschooling.
Interesting times.
Yeah.
Thanks, Lisa. Ahead on Full Measure, COVID and mass hysteria. The postmortem on what went so wrong with the COVID response is ongoing, but significant analysis surrounds a psychological aspect. Why were so many people fearfully convinced to go along with questionable and controversial measures and turn sometimes brutally against those who refuse to comply? Today I speak about that with Dr. Mark McDonald, psychiatrist and author of United States of Fear: How America Fell Victim to a Mass Delusional Psychosis. How did America fall victim to a mass delusional psychosis?
The weaponization of fear. Americans have become compliant. They've become adept at receiving signals to be afraid. And when groups and individuals consolidate their power and activate a national emergency and then offer a solution, which always involves giving up some form of freedom, Americans comply. And they will comply as long as they stay afraid.
Have you sensed or theorized who is behind that? Who was driving the fear? Was it a coordinated effort or something that just happened?
I think what happened was a crime of opportunity. I'm not a conspiracy theorist in the sense that there's a group of people in hoods sitting in a cave somewhere outside of Davos planning the next 100 years. And if they are, they're not going to be very successful. What I think happened was there was a confluence of opportunities among disparate groups who all had something to gain by instilling fear.
Do you think it's possible that fear made us sicker? And by that I mean, we always hear things reduce our immunity when your body is stressed or when certain things happen physiologically because you're afraid. Can that impact your immune system, and can that stand to make us sicker if we do get COVID than we might have been?
Absolutely. What fear does is induces, in a chronic sense, a stress response. And stress does two things. It does something to the body, which, as you say, is largely speaking lowering immunity, lowering your resistance to all forms of infection, and also long-term disease like cancer. Cancer is very highly linked to stress. It also does something psychologically, which is one who is afraid, one who is in a state of fear all the time, is constantly trying to control his environment. He develops obsessional thinking and compulsive behaviors. He limits his exposure to risk-taking. He stops being productive. He basically consolidates himself into a small space, which is largely speaking his home, or if at work, his home office. And I think that ultimately is the goal here, is control. Because when you have a consolidation of power, as we've seen politically and economically in the last 2-3 years, one group of people stands to benefit at the expense of everyone else when there's an easy road to control the population. That's why I think this happened, and that's why I think it's continuing.
What is mass psychosis?
The way that I describe it is a moment in time, now to some degree ongoing, 4 years later, where an entire population all goes crazy at the same time. So a mass delusional psychosis, from the way that I'm describing it and defining it in my book, is really an irrational, self-harming, but groupthink response to a modest or minor problem. And unfortunately, this issue, this movement that occurred in 2020 and moving forward, it's the first time in the United States history, in my lifetime anyway, that anything like this has happened. And I think it's the first time because it's the first time in the last 2 or 3 generations that we have had, America has had, the ability to instill so quickly and so powerfully and so chronically a feeling of fear in the population.
I guess that was made possible in a way because of technology and the internet and so on that couldn't have happened 50 years ago.
Exactly. I have something in my pocket called a smartphone that I believe is the primary driver of the psychosis of 2020, along with what we're seeing in the youth population, which is a complete loss of socialization, obesity, anxiety, body dysmorphia in girls, gaming addiction in boys, and ultimately deaths by drug overdose, specifically fentanyl, delivered to homes through apps like Snapchat, as well as suicides among a lot of young girls. The phone has really wrecked our culture. It's wrecked the adult culture, it's wrecked the child culture. Today, I tell parents, if there's one thing that you want to do to protect your children, take away their smartphone. Do not allow them to have one at all until they're 18 and they become an adult. I think that would solve many of the problems we have in our country.
By the way, there's a growing effort to remove or restrict access to cell phones by students in schools. At least 8 states have put restrictions in place, in addition to actions in other cities and districts across the country. After a break, what's ahead next week on Full Measure? Coming up next week on Full Measure, the Inspector General in charge of our spending on Afghanistan identified an incredible amount of waste, fraud, and abuse, $43 billion. We'll have an eye-opening exit interview with him as he winds down his office and his 20 years of watchdog work.
Well, we indicted and convicted over 150 people for fraud, waste, or abuse. We saved approximately $4 billion to the taxpayer.
Also coming up next week.
I'm Scott Thuman in Panama. President Trump has suggested the U.S. take back the Panama Canal, a critical point in shipping that's key to America's economy. That strategic importance is why Panama is part of Secretary of State Marco Rubio's first foreign trip. We take a look behind the options for President Trump, including military action. We report from Panama on the next Full Measure.
Until then, we'll be searching for more stories that hold powers accountable. Thanks for watching. I'm Sharyl Attkisson.